speaker, and Vandana Shiva, and she's talking a lot about Earth democracy, and we're about to hear some of the things that she's going to be speaking about shortly. But first of all, I wanted to ask you a little bit, since you've been very outspoken about some of the different the threats facing us in terms of food security, and put especially stressed the seed. It seems to me that there's a collision of paradigms, if that's the right word for it, one geared toward control and the other geared toward connectedness. You're in Winnipeg, you're in this land which is occupied territory, Anishinaabe territory. I'm wondering how you would translate your core message to this locality. How should listeners living in this area take out of it, considering the local circumstances?
Well, my message is the same message as is coming out from every place on this earth. The first part of it is the earth is not empty land. It is very creative force. The second, that people who have inhabited the land and the earth for centuries are not empty-headed. They have a lot of intelligence, a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge. And it is those economies that have sustained people over millennia. The third is there is a clash of civilizations taking place everywhere. One which pretends to be a civilization, but is actually anti-civilizing. And it's anti-civilizing because it's based on violence to the earth and violence to original inhabitants of the land. And the other based on living through diversity and cooperation and interconnectedness. So how does it play out in this particular part of the world? It's playing out with this beautiful feast of forgotten foods we've just had. If you were to ask Monsanto, how do you feed Winnipeg or Manitoba, they would say more GM corn, more GM soya, more GM canola. And if you talk to the indigenous people, they bring us this amazing feast in the middle of a winter, which has had minus 45 degrees. Now, to eat berries when you're surrounded by snow, to me is an example of a smarter food system than genetic modification.
Mm-hmm. I know that there's a growing resistance to the genetic modification, to the point where there's a reluctance to even label food as being genetically modified. They're not proud to advertise that this is genetically modified. And I'm wondering if that the people who are opposed to genetic modification, if they've got the whole message, because as I suggested earlier, there's like a whole paradigm of control. Is there some sense in which people can oppose, say, like the technology, but still embrace some aspects of the system?
Well, I work on GMOs because for me it's an issue of control. And there are lots of people who try and say, oh, there's the technology and then there's the control. And they forget the technology is the control. Because if corporations had not picked up the techniques of recombinant DNA, of taking genes from one organism and putting them into another, they wouldn't have had the ability to think that they can now declare that they are the inventors and creators of life, and therefore the owners of seed, and therefore can collect royalties. It is about control. And industry, of course, would like it to be reduced to a discussion on technology. It would then like to say, but we are the only ones who really know, because you're stupid. You don't really know anything about this technology, so leave it to us to manipulate the science and manipulate the organisms. We have to redefine the GMO question in terms of the issue of control, both in terms of the control over life through patenting and ownership, as well as control over the food system through the monopolies that this is leading to and the destruction of democracy that is built into it. If it was like any other technology, like this mic you're holding to record my voice, you have the option of picking about 30 kinds of mics, and you choose. Why isn't the option given for farmers to have their own seed? Why is that to be destroyed? That is seed totalitarianism. And why do eaters get denied the right to know what's in their food? Why is this very desperate attempt to block labeling? It's because it is an issue of control. And the minute people know, the minute people have a choice, the minute farmers have a freedom to save their seeds and exchange their seeds, this mechanism of control will die.
There's been a rash of farmers in India, tens of thousands. I think I've seen the number, 250,000 farmers who have taken their lives as a result of this form of control. And it occurs to me that in this part of the world, we see a disproportionate number of indigenous peoples suffering from illnesses, committing suicide, as opposed to other aspects of the society. And I'm wondering is it simplistic to make a connection there within that language of control?
I believe that the despair and desperation that people are being pushed to, whether it be indigenous people or it be farmers, and not just in India, we've lost 284,000 farmers to suicide since this globalization allowed the corporations to set up monopolies. It's happening in Japan, where people had jobs for a lifetime, and the idea of hire and fire was introduced. So today, you have 30,000 suicides a year in Japan. Half of the people committing suicide because they have no work, no job, and therefore no way to take care of themselves. And the other half are committing suicide because they're overstressed and overworked, because they're doing two people's jobs at a lower salary. An economy based on greed and control must lead to these kind of a burden being carried by people. But I remember long ago, long before globalization came to India, I was invited to give a talk and have a debate with David Hopper, one of the architects of the Green Revolution in India. I think he used to head the Rockefeller Foundation, and at that point he was the vice president of the World Bank. And it was a food summit. He talked about how we didn't have to worry because now we grow food on the moon and in the Sahara and on toxic dumps. And in the foyer were exhibitions. And there was one desk which had flyers for a helpline for farmers, a 1-800 number. Farmers wanting to commit suicide in Canada, long before Indian farmers decide to commit suicide. In Netherlands, I met a priest whose job is to answer distress calls from farmers wanting to commit suicide. Now, if your economy is made into a negative economy where costs of production are higher than what you will ever earn, because corporations make money at both ends, selling you costly inputs and buying cheap commodities, that negative economy, you cannot sustain yourself for too long. And the system is such that it says, you should be prosperous because it's about a technology. And if you're not making it, it's because something's wrong with you. And farmers internalize that deficiency. Indigenous people colonized over centuries internalize this idea that it's our fault. And that is how control systems work. I think the solution is to realize that the security doesn't come from shares of a criminal company. Security comes from community. Security comes from skills and knowledge of creating freedom by providing what you need in your community from your local ecosystem. And that's why this Feast of Forgotten Foods is so impressive to me, because it is showing real security.